30 years ago, the mother of a man named Bill was killed by gigantic carnivorous plant creatures known as triffids. Similar to his mother's goal, Bill has been trying to understand these creatures for years through their sounds. In this world, triffids have solved man's problems with pollution due to producing an alternative source of fuel. But because of their usefulness, the major companies that harbor triffids have to hide them from the world. On one fateful day, an activist manages to intercept the company where Bill works. The man enters a containment area where gigantic sprawling male triffids reside. Bill's security guard friend, Lucy, immediately heads into the containment area to restrain the trespasser, and Bill follows her behind. But the activist takes Lucy hostage and removes her protective eyeglasses. Bill insists that the activist should return it, but he tosses it out instead. As such, Bill gives his protective eyeglasses to Lucy. Bill takes this opportunity to electrify the man using his taser. However, a triffid tentacle attacks him out of the blue, injuring Bill's face. Due to the danger of being wounded by a triffid, Lucy takes the doctor immediately to the hospital. The activist, on the other hand, is arrested by the company's guards and detained in a room. Because the wound is near his eyes, Bill is told by the doctor that he has a 50-50 chance of permanently going blind. Afterward, anesthesia is injected into him, causing him to fall asleep for 24 hours. That night, a highly anticipated global light show in the sky occurs due to a solar storm. However, what is supposed to be a harmless scenery turns out to be a destructive one, as it instantly blinds the people who witnessed it. At this point, Bill wakes up to the sound of people screaming. Even with bandages wrapped around his eyes, he manages to get to the bathroom and face the mirror. Upon removing it, he is grateful that he can still see. At that moment, he looks outside at the window and spots debris from a crashing plane, hitting the room where he is at. Fortunately, he survives the freak accident that almost killed him. Simultaneously, a man inside that crashing plane, who has been asleep during the solar storm, selfishly takes the blind passenger's life vests. He then locks himself inside the bathroom and covers himself with the life vests, bracing for the plane's eventual crash in the middle of a city. The man inside the airplane bathroom barely survives the terrifying ordeal. Right at that moment, he decides to give himself a new name, Torrance. Instead of feeling despair or fear, Torrance is quite giddy about taking advantage of the apocalyptic event. As such, he immediately gathers some clothes, weapons, and any sort of items that he could take. After collecting such necessary items, Torrance proceeds to change his overall identity. Meanwhile, Bill heads out of the room and walks around the hospital in search of a doctor. There, he witnesses the blind people scrambling around, searching for answers as to why their visions have suddenly gone out. Later on, Bill meets and rescues a radio personality who survived the blinding solar storm named Joe. Being able to see, the blinded people are clamoring toward her, but Bill manages to remove her from their presence. He tells Joe that he has to go to Whitehall to ask the government if the electricity might go down. He worries about the threat of losing electricity on triffid farms. Meanwhile, the activist that is detained at the company is once again free due to the widespread crisis of blindness. He takes advantage of the situation by disabling the system's emergency protocol, shutting down the power, and finally emancipating the triffids he saw earlier. After walking for a while, Bill and Joe finally reach Whitehall, where they see the people gathered at the gates of the government. Even though everybody is blind, the blinded guards are still maintaining order by not letting the people enter through the gates. In just a short moment, everything descends into chaos as guards shoot the people due to a gun mishap. Bill and Joe have to move away from the massacre. While walking away, Joe tells him that she has to check on her father while Bill wants to head to the triffid farm where he worked. As such, they decide to travel together, immediately finding a car and quickly heading first to the triffid farm. There, they see a partially destroyed building. They also learn that triffids have escaped their detainment, shocking Joe because she doesn't know that triffids can move. The two eventually see the activist from earlier with his guts ripped out. For Joe, this is a shocking sight, but Bill already knows that triffids are dangerous carnivores. Heartbreakingly, the devastated Bill also sees that his friend Lucy is already dead. Later, they head to Bill's office room. He lets Joe rest on the sofa while he retrieves his research files that contain triffid sounds. Joe asks if he can take her to her father near Windsor because she's worried about him. Bill accepts this request. After getting the files, the two proceed to the location of Joe's dad. However, upon getting there, they find out that Joe's father is already dead and being dragged by a triffid as its lunch. Still in denial, Joe doesn't want to let go of her father. But it is already too late to save him at this point. All Joe can do is grieve for her dear father. As they drive away from the scene, they see the sprawling herd of gigantic triffids roaming around the empty road in search of meat. Seeing this, Bill wants to warn people about this new danger that has been unleashed in the world. For this reason, the two rush to the radio tower to deliver the urgent message about the Triffids escape from their farms and that they will most likely head to cities. After the brief interview, Bill tells Joe that he doesn't see his father eye to eye. Meanwhile, Torrance walks through the empty streets of the city. He later heads to the Prime Minister's main residence and nonchalantly enters it. A blind woman asks for his identity. Seeing that the woman cannot do anything to stop him, Torrance walks upstairs. Some time has passed and a blind woman goes upstairs as well, still trying to remove Torrance from the building. After hearing a radio recording from earlier, Torrance quickly tells the blind woman that they will later go for a drive. Meanwhile, Bill wakes Joe up due to seeing two flare lights coming from the city. As such, they immediately move out to check out this distress signal. On the way there, they meet Torrance, who is collecting rifles from the back of a van. After learning that the two are heading into the city due to seeing some flare lights, Torrance urges them to team up, but Bill refuses. Just like that, their meeting ends abruptly as they go their separate ways. Eventually, Bill and Joe reach the heart of the city where they see a group of blind people being led by a sighted man named Coker. The man urges the military to help the blind folks. Upon reaching a woman named Michelle, Coker quickly grabs her and takes her hostage. Because of this, the soldiers send a warning shot through their artillery, enough for Coker to let go of Michelle and retreat from the place with the blind folks. Afterward, Bill and Joe head to the military's side. Inside, Bill tells them that they need to construct a plan against the carnivorous plants. Despite Bill's ardent explanation, Michael still thinks that the Triffids should not be high on their priority list. That night, Bill packs up his things without Joe's knowledge. Joe then listens to Michelle's announcement about finding a new place and rebuilding their civilization from scratch without helping the blind folks. Joe leaves in disgust and disappointment. She later sees Bill gathering supplies in his car. He tells Joe that he will head to his father's place in Cherning to know more about the Triffids and how to stop them. But before he can leave, Coker's group has infiltrated the building and has taken Joe, Bill, and others as hostages. It turns out that Coker's group has gained a new ally, Torrance. Immediately, they implement a tactic wherein the sighted will be handcuffed with the blind folks to keep each other alive. Even then, this group doesn't prioritize Triffids as well. Coker instructs them to ride the trucks to forage food and water somewhere else. For this reason, they head out to the city. One of Coker's men, Osman, takes Bill and his assigned blind folk with him to check a nearby bar. After securing the bar, they settle there with Torrance and others. Recognizing her as the voice behind the emergency radio broadcast, Torrance tells Joe to do another for them, but Joe refuses. Later, Coker conducts a scavenging mission at a warehouse full of supplies alongside Bill, Joe, and Osman. There, for the first time, Coker encounters the Triffid threat that Bill has been telling him this whole time. In an instant, the situation turns to the worst. Coker soon apologizes to Bill for not listening to him. He then orders a newly arrived Torrance to give Bill everything he wants because he knows what to do with the Triffids. After returning to the bar, Joe calls Torrance, informing him that she has changed her mind about doing the radio broadcast. And so she does the radio broadcast, urging the people to join any soldiers that will approach them. However, unknown to her, the soldiers are now led by Torrance in a coup against Coker. Osman, now following Torrance, shoots Bill in the shoulder before arresting him. He and Coker are then taken to a place known as Heath. After the announcement, Torrance lies to Joe that Bill is already dead, causing her to grieve for her friend. Meanwhile, Bill and Coker escape the truck that is driven by Osman after being ambushed by Triffids in the middle of a forest. Despite this, Osman tells both of them to move in front of the truck where many Triffids are waiting. Thanks to his quick thinking, Bill takes out his audio recording of Triffid sounds and throws it toward Osman's location, causing the Triffids to attack him instead. With this, Bill and Coker take the truck and drive away. After driving for some time, the engine stops. As such, they have to walk despite the upcoming rain of snow. Eventually, they reach a monastery full of survivors who quickly treat Bill's shoulder wound. The head nun, Durant, warmly welcomes them. Meanwhile, Joe still feels down due to Bill's death. However, she finds it weird that Torrance invites her to dinner like there is no imminent threat at all. She politely refuses his advances. Later on, she gets to talk with a young man named Troy. Through Troy's conversation, she suspects that Bill is still alive, prompting her to run away. Back at the monastery, Bill has recovered from his wound and wants to talk with Durant about the nearby Triffids being passive toward them. According to Durant, the Triffids are passive due to God's will. Not believing this, Bill suspects that Durant must be hiding something. As such, he still wants to continue his mission of finding his father in Cherning. Walking in the forest, Bill makes a shocking discovery. It turns out that Durant is sacrificing people to appease the Triffids, thereby explaining their passivity. Because of this, he returns to the monastery, revealing to everyone about Durant's awful sacrificial practice. The head nun tries to explain that what she did was for the greater good, but the people are already disgusted and horrified by this point. Because of this, Durin is banished from the community she tried so hard to preserve. With the over-controlling head nun now gone, radio is re-established in the monastery. As Bill opens the radio device, he feels relieved in hearing Joe's voice through the radio. Afterward, Bill sets off on his journey to find his father. Meanwhile, Joe tells Torrance that she has changed her mind about the dinner with him. She now wants to do it later after her broadcast. Instead, Joe delivers what would be her final radio broadcast where she warns people to steer clear of London. Infuriated by this, Torrance quickly heads to Joe's broadcast room. However, it is only Joe's recording there. She has already escaped earlier. As such, everyone tries to search for her. Eventually, Troy spots Joe hiding behind a barricaded bus, but he doesn't tell this to his comrades. After his fellow soldiers leave, Troy secretly gives a flashlight to Joe and wishes her good luck. With her disappearance, Torrance is left heartbroken. Immediately, Joe encounters many Triffids along the roads. But through her quick thinking, she manages to escape them by taking a car and driving away from there. However, she eventually crashes after not paying attention to the road due to staring at the map. Because of this, she has to continue her journey on foot. Unfortunately, late at night, Joe gets captured by a mysterious hooded person with a car. Meanwhile, Bill's travel has taken him to a small town where he encounters two armed and sighted little girls named Imogen and Susan who almost killed him. But after getting to know each other, the three agree to travel toward Churning. On their way there, they see an approaching car, the same one that chased Joe earlier. The hooded driver gets out and meets them, revealing himself to be Dennis, Bill's estranged father. Bill is not happy to see him at all. The father and son then drive in separate cars toward Churning, a huge hidden mansion covered in electric fences. The girls already notice how scary of a man Bill's father is. Inside, Bill and Joe happily reunite with each other. Bill also introduces the two girls to her. They then share a passionate and romantic kiss while inside a secluded room. Afterward, Bill and Dennis discuss the plan to eliminate the Triffids. Dennis wants to create a new genetic line of Triffids that sterilizes rather than fertilizes, a plan which Bill thinks is absurd. But the conversation descends into a heart-to-heart talk where Bill airs out his anger and frustration toward his absentee father. As soon as this is said, the father and son return to planning the Triffids' downfall. Dennis tells his son that all he needs is a male Triffid to conduct the plan. Bill promises that he will capture one, volunteering to embark on the dangerous mission alone as he doesn't want to harm Joe and the girls. After saying goodbye to Joe, Bill immediately heads to an abandoned factory to hunt a male Triffid. To lure them, Bill sets up his audio recording of a Triffid sound. Unexpectedly, he learns that Susan followed him. At that exact moment, Susan's ankle is dragged by a gigantic Triffid. The infuriated Bill shoots the plant and eventually burns the Triffid's head to kill it and rescue Susan. The mission ends as a success, and the two head back home with the Triffid's head. Later on, the father and son talk about the idea that Triffids can communicate with each other based on the sounds they make. On a similar note, Dennis gives Bill the Triffid recordings that were collected by his mother. Afterward, Bill and the others notice the floating white things in the air that look like snow. However, Bill tells the girls that they are spores from the Triffids, a bad sign of things to come. The next day, a plane piloted by Coker flies over Churning. He drops off some flyers that indicate a Triffid-free community that was formed in the Isle of Wight. Everyone is happy to hear this news. Dennis goes back inside to feed the Triffid. As he does this, he listens to his wife's recording of a Triffid sound. However, this sound triggers the captive Triffid, attacking Dennis the moment he approaches the cell. Dennis yells to his son for help in turning off the recording. Because he needs to save his father's life, Bill is forced to kill the captive Triffid even though they need it. But it is too late for Dennis as the Triffid's poison is already coursing through his veins. In just a few seconds, he dies on the spot. That night, after burning Dennis' corpse, Bill and Joe decide that it is time to move to the Isle of Wight. Upon opening a certain box, Bill sees a mask that instantly causes him to remember a distant memory, prompting him to close the box immediately. The following day, Bill and the girls are surprised to find that Torrance and his men have found their place. This is because Troy found a crucial file earlier that indicated Churning is Bill's residence. Torrance threatens to kill them all if he doesn't find a solution to the Triffid problem. Bill has no choice but to accept. Locked inside a room, Bill and the girls think of a way to escape. All of a sudden, Bill has an idea wherein they will use the Triffids to escape Torrance and his men. To do this, they have to use the Triffid recordings to lure the plant monsters. When Bill is summoned by Torrance for a brief warning, Susan sneaks outside and successfully plants the recording device there without being noticed. That night, one of Torrance's men notices the device and reports it to Torrance. Furious, Torrance orders Troy to shoot Bill and the girls. Hesitant, Troy still heads to Bill's room and points the gun toward them. But Joe manages to convince the young man into defecting to their side. Troy fools Torrance by fake shooting Bill and the girls. With the Triffids slowly approaching the mansion, Torrance orders Troy to turn on the electric fences. However, Troy fakes this as well. Seeing the electric fence not working, Torrance heads into the mansion to check it himself. He then spots them trying to escape, causing him to shoot Troy in the leg. But with quick thinking, Bill electrifies Torrance with a taser. Suddenly, Bill remembers crucial information from the past regarding the mask he saw earlier. It turns out that dropping triffid poison through the small eye hole of the mask will temporarily blind the person. But in this way, the Triffids will no longer harm them. And so each of them applies this method to their eyes. Fortunately, the method works and they head out unscathed. On the other hand, Torrance and his men get run down by the Triffids and are promptly killed. The next morning, Bill, Troy, and the girls now head to the Isle of Wight on a boat, thereby securing their lives.